Okay, today's daf is Nedarim daf Ayin Chet. Today's daf is sponsored by Yafa Wenner in memory of her father, David ben Rav Shaya Meir HaKohen, on his 26th year at Tzait. May his neshama have an aliyah, b'zchut our continued learning. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family in memory of Leroy Mazi, beloved father of Deborah Hoffman Wade, and in memory of her chavruta Simcha Lisheva bat Avraham b'Sarah. May your memories and your learning bring you nechama. Okay, I mentioned yesterday, I'll mention again, the Siyum Nedarim is coming up in 2 weeks. Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to do it on Tuesday, January 24th. We have a good program lined up, 2 lectures, one by Rabbanit, Dr. Adina Sternberg, about the comparison, as I mentioned yesterday, from Torah law to rabbinic law relating to Nedarim. It'll also be a good kind of intro to Nazir. And Advocate Michal Cutler-Wunsch will be speaking about the power of words and as it affects anti-Semitism and all that, which will be an interesting twist, an interesting connection to what we've been talking about the entire Masechet, is how carefully one should choose words and what one means by one's words and what the dangers of words can be. Okay, so we hope you're all there. On Monday night, there will be Siyumim in Israel in all different places. I'll be teaching in Yerushalayim. In Renana, there's going to be one in English actually on Tuesday morning. So we're going to do a learning session. It'll be kind of commemorating the Siyum, not exactly doing the Siyum, but it will be a learning, a chavruta learning. So that'll be Tuesday morning on the 24th, and Monday night in Yerushalayim. That one will be on Zoom, and there will be others around the country. All the details will go out within the next day or two. With that, we're going to get started. And just to clarify, all the ones in Israel are going to be in Hebrew, other than the one in Renana, which will take place in English on Tuesday morning. Okay, we were dealing with this. I want to go back for 1 minute to clarify something. So it's good when people ask questions. I realized what I forgot to clarify. So we talked at the end of yesterday's daf about the bitul balev. So we started with this issue that on Shabbat, you shouldn't use the regular language of being mefer a neder, when the husband or the father wants to say to the wife or the daughter, your neder is not going to happen anymore, right? We're canceling this. So he basically, on Shabbat, he can't use the language of canceling, bitul or hafara. He has to use a different kind of language, like saying to her, you must eat this food, okay? You must drink this drink, when she forbade herself to do it. And then, in addition, he has to have this intent in his heart, which again, we said maybe he has to express between himself in words, even though no one else hears him, or maybe just think it in his heart. That was the bitul balev. Then we saw the Beit Shamai says, which is what we saw before, which is on Shabbat, you do the bitul balev, and on a regular day, you have to express it in the words, meaning the special words, mufal, batel, something like that. And Beit Hillel said, even during the week, you don't have to express it in words. You can just think it in your heart. Now, again, think it in your heart maybe means express it between you and yourself, or actually, right, or just think it without saying anything. But what I didn't clarify is that what this means is, what Beit Hillel is saying is, it doesn't mean just thinking it in your heart. You say to her something like, eat it, drink it, and in your heart, you think, I'm nullifying the vow. Okay, so you do have to express something to her. It has to be clear to her that you're getting rid of her vow. It's just that you don't necessarily need to use the special words, mufer, batel. Okay, now, if it's a little bit strange, because yesterday, earlier in the daf, we talked about how if you use a particular language, it doesn't work. And if you say, in neder, it doesn't work, or things like that. But this is basically saying that if you use these key words, eat this, that works as long as you have some sort of hafara in your heart. Okay, that's what it means. I'm sorry that I didn't specify that clearly enough yesterday. Okay, now, then we're going to start 3 lines from the bottom. We started this already, but this is going to continue. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, chacham she'amar b'lashon ba'al, u'ba'al she'amar b'lashon chacham. If a chacham uses the languages of a husband, or the husband uses the languages of a chacham, meaning when you go to get rid of your neder, to dissolve it with a chacham, if he uses the language of mufar lecha, okay, that doesn't work, or mufar lach. And if the husband uses the language of hatarat nedarim, mutar lach, to the wife, that doesn't work either. They each have their own unique language. Where do we get this from? Tanya, as it says, Ze hadavar. This is the intro pasuk to the whole section on the vows that we saw before, about the vows of the father, the husband, all that section. So from the word Ze hadavar, which means this is the thing, which really also has to do with davar dibul, okay? Davar means object or thing. And I don't know the best way to translate the word Ze hadavar. This is the way it is. But it also has the language of dibur, words. So they learn from here, chacham matir ve'en habal matir. When we talk about hatarat nedarim, that's done by chacham and not the husband. Sheyachol, you might have thought, uma chacham. Now they're going to say, each time they're going to say this, right? We're going to learn from here. Only the chacham is matir, and the chacham is only allowed to be matir. And then we're going to say the husband is only allowed to be mefer. So they bring each time a kavachomer. You might have thought it would work that they're going to bring the reverse kavachomer each time. You'll see. Yacholu machacham she'ein mafer matil. A chacham can't do hafarat nedarim, and yet he can do hatarat nedarim. So what would the logic state? Baal shemefer, the husband who has more rights than him because he can do hafara, whereas the chacham can't do hafara. Then ein odin shematir. So wouldn't he also allowed to do hatara? As the husband obviously has more power because the husband can nullify his wife's vows. So therefore, maybe he also would have the power to undo her vows, to do hatara. Talmud lomar, ze hadavar, chacham matil ve'en habal matil. So ze hadavar comes to teach you, no. Each one is unique. The husband only has rights to do hafara. He does not have rights to do hatara. And there's another braita, Tanya idach, ze hadavar, a different braita darshans it differently. Baal mefer ve'en chacham mefer. Okay, it's the reverse, which is, or the flip case. The husband can be mefer, he can nullify his wife's vows, but the chacham can't do hafara. She'acholu ma'abal she'en matir mefer. You might have thought the husband can't do hafara and can do can't undo the vow, but he can nullify his wife's vow. So a chacham shematir, so the chacham has more power than him. As I said, it's the reverse logic of the last one. The chacham has more power because he could do hatara and the husband can't. Ein odin shemefer, so shouldn't he be allowed also to nullify vows? Talmud lomar zeh davar baal mefer ve'en chacham mefer. Okay, therefore, again, the pasuk teaches you each one is very specific. Before we go on, we have to deal with a few things here. Number one, this drasha of zeh davar is on the psukim about hafara, not the psukim about hatara. Why? Well, first of all, there are no psukim about hatara. So it's very interesting that we're taking words from the Torah to teach us that specifically the chacham can be matir and the husband can't be matir. Who said it wasn't even in the Torah that the chacham can be matir? Remember, that's what we talked about. Heter nedarina porchim ba'avir. We saw this in Chagiga. They're floating in the air, and ema mamashi ismochu. There's no text in the Torah that says it. There's no. Well, we're going to see there's a little bit of a text, and we're going to see that right now. In the Ran. Okay, so the Ran says. Baal shamar b'lashon chacham. It's 3 lines from the bottom on Ayin Zayin Amud Bet. So what's the lashon chacham? Shamar mutar lach. Okay, lashon baal mefurash u'bekatuv. He says if you want to know what the language of the husband is, we know that because it's called hafarat, right? Isha yiferena. It says it explicitly. But lashon chacham dehavi mutar lach mashmale. So now he has to explain how did we get that hatara is mutar lach? Where did we get that from? I mean, obviously we know the word hatara and mutar come from the same root. But we made up this word hatara, right? It wasn't in the Torah anywhere. So he says you can derive it from mashmale. It sounds like it comes from midichtiv lo yachel dvaro, in a different section of the Torah where it talks about in Dvarim, that we're in Bamidbar now, but in Dvarim, when it talks about a vow, you have to keep your word. It says lo yachel dvaro. Don't desecrate your word. You have to keep it. So now what do they say? What do they learn from here? Klomar lo yaseh dvarav chulim. Don't make your words chol, non-sacred, meaning keep the sacredness of your word. Vidarshinan, and they learned from here, and this is where we learned this in Chagiga. This is where they get it from. They're prochim ba'avir. They don't really have what to rely on, but they do somewhat have something to rely on. Vidarshinan aval acherim mochalim lo. Lo yachel dvaro means you can't desecrate your word, but someone else can turn your words into chol. What does that mean? Take away the sanctity of it, meaning undo your words. And then bechulin, now how do we get to mutar lach from here? He says, well, chulin, mutar shayach lemeimar behu. When you're matir, something that's sacred, and you turn it into chol, right, which is non-sacred, you would do it by lahatir. He says that's the word you would use. Okay, it's not really clear from anywhere. That's the logic of the Ran. That's the first thing I wanted to show you. The second thing is that the Ran, this is where the Ran says, I've told you before, even though we haven't seen it inside, about the differences between hafara and hatara and how they work. And basically, this sugya implies it's not just the wording, but it's the whole idea. And it's why would you want to even suggest that maybe a chacham can be mefer and maybe a husband can be matir? Because what there's a difference between them, which is the Ran says at the end of the first Ran on the page on Ayin Chet kind of starts, it's continued from the page before. And then if you look at the very end of that, before it gets to the words Ne'amar Kan, he says, Ulefizem mashmali. From here, it seems to me, again, all this seems to be, because none of this is clear cut. When we do hafara, it's from now going forward. But when you say mutal, it basically goes retroactively. So here's what the Ran says. It basically, he gets it from the fact that there must be this big difference if they're trying to suggest he could do this one and he could do that one, that there must be a big difference between them, and he suggests this is the difference. Okay, whereas, remember I told you, there's a debate about whether hafara is retroactive or from here on in, but here you see the Ran says it's from here on in, and it's a difference between hatara and hafara. That was all a drasha on the word hadavar. Now, we're going to get off on a tangent because we're going to learn something else from hadavar. It's not exactly a tangent that's not connected. It is connected, but not necessarily to our topic, our direct topic that we're discussing right now. Ne'amar kan hadavar, v'ne'amar lahalan hadavar. Now they're going to say, wait, we also have a gezeira shava. Hadavar, this isn't the only place it appears. It also appears by shchutei chutz. Okay? What is hadavar? Ne'amar lahalan hadavar b'shchutei chutz. What does shchutei chutz? Shchutei chutz means when I designate an animal for a sacrifice, I have to sacrifice it in the place that God chooses, right? The place that God chose, which is either the temple in the times of the temple or the tabernacle in the times of the Mishkan in the times of the tabernacle. And if I do it outside, I actually am liable to get punished by karet. It's very serious. So now, hadavar appears by Nedarim, and it appears there. Now we're going to point out that the shchutei chutz section, where it talks about it, in Vayikra, chapter 17, it starts off with Daber el Aharon ve'el banav ve'el kol bnei Israel. God commands Moshe, speak to Aaron, his sons, and all of the Jewish people. So that's the first thing to know. By shchutei chutz, it says hadavar, and it also says speak to Aaron, his sons, and all of the Jews. So therefore, we're going to learn by this gezeira shava. Gezeira shava is when two words appear, the same word in two different places. We're going to learn what's true for one is true for the other. So we're going to learn that by Nedarim, it's also Aaron ubanav v'chol Yisrael, which we're going to basically not yet understand what we're learning from there. So hold off for 1 minute. We'll get back to it. And the next is Ma kan rashei hamatot af lahalan rashei hamatot. And in Nedarim, it says that Moshe spoke to Vayitaber Moshe el rashei hamatot. In that chapter we've been looking at, Bamidbar chapter 30 of Haparat Nedarim, it starts off with Moshe spoke to the heads of each of the tribes. So now it's confusing because one was spoken to Aaron, his sons, and all of the Jewish people, and the other one was spoken to Rashei hamatot. And what we're basically going to say is we're going to learn from that one was Rashei hamatot and that one was Aaron ubanav and Kol Yisrael. So we're very confused. What does this mean? The Gemara is going to explain. So the next words are Parashat Nedarim Lamai Hilchata. But if you have your regular Gemara in front of you, you'll see that there's a little bet. The bet, or at least maybe you have some other, I don't know, mine says bet, takes you to the Hagahot v'Tziyunim that basically says in a bunch of the Kitvei Yad, the manuscripts, it says Aharon ubanav v'chol Yisrael b'Parashat Nedarim Lamai Hilchata, which makes a lot more sense. The words Aharon ubanav v'chol Yisrael that we're taking from shchutei chutz, sacrificing outside the temple, and kind of pasting them into Nedarim, what does that come to teach us? To teach you that when it comes to undoing your vows, that again, remember, it was a section of hafara, not hatara, but they kind of meld them all together. So now, when it comes to that, you don't have to go to 3 judges who are learned, knowledgeable people. It's enough to go to 3 random people who don't have any particular talent in this area, aren't particularly knowledgeable on the subject. You can do it in front of them. How do we get that? From Aharon, Banav, V'chol Yisrael. Notice that the Jewish people are treated the exact same way as Aaron, who was the Kohen. So therefore, we learn we're taking from the Shchutei Chutz, because remember, that didn't appear by the Nedarim. In a minute, we're going to get to what about Rashi Matot? Didn't he say to the heads of the tribes, which would sound like, okay, we'll get there in a second. So he says, that's what we learn, Shlosha Yotot. V'ha Rashi Matot ktiv, but doesn't it say Rashi Matot? So it sounds like by Nedarim, it says explicitly, forget about what we learned from gezeira shava. It's obviously much stronger what it says explicitly in the text than what we learn from gezeira shava, from this other word, the word that appears somewhere else as well. To which they answer, there's 2 tracks. You can either go to one specialist, that would be Nedarim Rashi Matot, and from the Shchutei Chutz we learn, but the alternative is to go to 3 adjotot, 3 regular people. They don't need to be judges particularly, or knowledgeable Torah scholars. That's the first thing we learn from gezeira shava. Now we have to do what do we learn to Shchutei Chutz from Nedarim, because it goes in both ways. And we said, we're now going to copy and paste into Nedarim. Now we have to copy and paste Rashi Matot into Shchutei Chutz. What does that teach us? So now they say, what does that teach us? The gezeira shava in the other direction. This is a fascinating halacha. This means that if you designate an animal for a sacrifice, and then you sacrifice it outside the temple, and you're going to get karet right now because you did that. Well, you can go to a chacham, just like you do with a neder, and this is what we're learning to Shchutei Chutz. And you can say, had I known I was going to get karet, I never would have designated this animal. You can come up with some sort of, right, a petach, as we said. If you could come up with a reason why you didn't realize something, and therefore you never would have designated this animal, you can actually undo the sanctification, which is a very interesting, unique halacha, because you would think to sanctify an animal for a sacrifice, there's nothing you could do. And in fact, we're going to learn later on, we probably learned it already, but certainly once we get to Zvachim and Tmura and all those, we're going to see how seriously we take sanctification. Yet it says here, and this thing appears only 3 times in all of Shas, which is interesting, that you can actually undo hekdesh, just like you undo a neder. You have to go to a chacham. You can't just do it yourself. And exactly. So it's a fascinating halacha. You ask, can you do it halacha l'maaseh? So I looked this up because I was really fascinated by it. Especially, you think about all those sugyas about tmura, which is substitution. How can you substitute an animal? So I'm going to read to you. Let me just pull it up. The Rambam, and then the Shulchan Aruch quotes the Rambam. Okay, on this halacha, it happens to be the very last words of Hilchot Nedarim of the Rambam. It's in chapter 13, halacha 25, in the Rambam in Hilchot Nedarim, which is in the book of Hafla'ah. He has a book where the whole subject is Hafla'ah, which is expressions that you make. So it says here, I'll read. Amru Chachamim, kol hanoder keilu bana bama v'im'avar v'nadar mitzvah lisha'el al nidro, kedei shelo yehei mechshol lefanav. Okay, so first he talks about, right, interesting, he brings this at the very end of all of Masechet Nedarim. It's not a good thing to take a vow, and therefore it's a mitzvah, he says, to get rid of your vow, so that you don't have a stumbling block in front of you. Right, it goes with what we said before. It's not an obligation. We talked about this yesterday, right? It's not an obligation for him, but it is a mitzvah. It's an important thing to do. So this is all true when it comes to a neder of isur, like I forbid myself to do the following. But if you dedicated something to the temple, it's a mitzvah to keep it. Okay, that's a different kind. It is like a vow. Remember, we talked about that in the beginning of the Masechet, that they're very similar. Now they say, V'lo yisha'el alehem ela midochak. And if you're going he intimates here, you can do she'elah, but only if you're really, really stuck. Okay. And that's why I think the example of she'elah b'kodeshim comes up with shchutei chutz, because you're really stuck here, you're going to get karet. To avoid a punishment of karet will allow you to do it. But if it's just, I don't really want to bring this animal, I want to bring a different one instead, that's the whole thing of tamura, you can't substitute. By the way, so this would mean, okay, it's very, very interesting. I'll just read the last words because I'm almost there. Then he just says, how do we know this? Because it says in Tehillim, Nedarim LaHashem Shalem. Okay, we know that from Hallel, right? That I will pay back my vows. Now, every time you say Hallel, you'll think of those words. Nedarim LaHashem Shalem. And with that, Slika Lahu Hilchot Nedarim B'Siyata Shmaya. With that, we finish Hilchot Nedarim. So what I wanted to point out here is it's very interesting because it seems like Tamura means you can't substitute another animal. You want to switch the animal, you can't do that. However, you really can if you do she'elah. In other words, why? Because that's how legal things work. She'elah is like just like hatarat nedarim. It undoes it from the beginning. So as if it was never sanctified. And then there is no substitution if you take a different animal in its stead, if you cancel it and take someone. So it's a fascinating, you can kind of basically override, as far as I can tell, you can override tamura, from what I understand. But not that I'm suggesting you do that. Anyway, it's not really all relevant nowadays. But so it's important to know. Okay, so now we have this idea. Again, let me just review because we kind of got sidetracked. We have this gezeira shava hadavar. We're going to learn to Nedarim from shchutei chutz that 3 hadyotot. We're going to learn to shchutei chutz that yesh she'elah b'kodashim. You can actually undo it to avoid the karet prohibition. Now we're going to say the following. 1 minute. Beit Shamai de'amar ein she'elah behekdesh, but wait, not everyone thinks that you could do this. Okay, so we said wow before, right? I saw your reaction, but you have a wow. But Beit Shamai says no way, no how. You cannot do this. So according to him, now we have to see what does he do with this gezeira shava. So the answer is very simple. They're going to say, so Rashem, let's just keep reading. Beit Shamai de'amar ein she'elah behekdesh, Rashem toch tichtiv b'shchutei chutz l'may hilchata. What's this gezeira shava that we're taking the words Rashem Atod and we're applying them also to shchutei chutz? For what purpose? Beit Shamai leilu gezeira shava. Very simply, they don't have a gezeira shava. If you remember, gezeira shava is something you have to do only if you learned it from your rabbi. You can't make it up. You can't say, oh, look, there's 2 words. Let's learn one from the other. It has to be a tradition. They didn't have the tradition of this gezeira shava. That's going to raise a whole bunch of problems. What's it going to raise? So the gezeira shava taught us 2 things. One, he doesn't learn, so that's very easy. The other one, though, 3 hadyotot, where is he going to learn that from? And if he doesn't have gezeira shava hadavar, so what is hadavar teaching us? We need to teach us something, both in, we're going to have basically 3 questions. Number 1, where is he going to learn gimel hadyotot from for Nedarim? Number 2, what does he do with hadavar by neder? And number 3, what does he do with hadavar by shchutei chutz? In other words, we're assuming it's an added word. It's added words. It's not necessary. It must be to teach us something. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to start from hadavar. So hadavar b'parashat Nedarim l'may k'tiv. So what is the hadavar doing in Nedarim? Lomar chacham matil ve'ena baal matil. Baal mefer ve'ena chacham mefer. Remember, how did we get here in the first place? We had a drasha on hadavar. Then we brought another drasha of the gezeira shava. But we started with this other drasha that each one has its own unique wording, and that's what it's doing there. That the baal mefer the words of hafara can be used for atara, and the words for atara can be used for hafara, and the baal can be matir, and the chacham can't be mefer, and that's what we get. Okay, that's very easy. Hadavar b'shchutei chutz l'may k'tiv. So what's the hadavar b'shchutei chutz? Remember, hadavar is basically being learned to teach you. It's very specific, right? If it's not for the gezeira shava, then it's to tell you this can only be done in this way, and nothing else can be done in that way. Or this is only. So now, how do we do this? So they say, what's the hadavar b'shchutei chutz? Lomar ala shchita chayav ve'en chayav ala melika. There's 2 ways they would slaughter in the temple. One was the slaughtering of animals, and that was done in the regular shchita manner. But when it came to birds, if you want to eat a bird, you have to slaughter it in a kosher shchita way. But if you're doing it in the temple, there was a unique way in which you did it. It was called melika, and the Kohen would use his thumb, the fingernail, his fingernail from his thumb, in the back of the neck of the bird. He would pinch it, and that was the way they would slaughter the birds. And if you do shchita for a bird in the temple, that's not a kosher shchita. Okay, you have to do melika. So comes the hadavar to teach you this lav shchutei chutz, which is talking about slaughtering of animals, basically is only if you slaughter the animal and not if you do malika outside the temple. So if you take a bird that was designated as sacrifice and you did malika outside the temple, you wouldn't be liable for shchutei chutz, because shchutei chutz is only for the way specified in the Torah, which was slaughtering an animal, and not doing the malika on a bird. Ella. So we resolved hadavar by neder. We resolved hadavar by shchutei chutz. Now what are we left with? Where does he learn gimel hadrotot? This is going to be a bit more, it'll take a little bit more time to get to. Ella Beit Shamai lachshir shlosha hadrotot minalam. Where does he get that from? Nafkalemi de Ravasi bar Natan. He's going to learn it from Ravasi bar Natan. Really not what he said, but the story about Rav Asi bar Natan. Dichtiv. Here we're going to start out with a pasuk, and then we're going to start out with a breita on it, and we're going to have a problem with the breita. Rav Asi is going to struggle with understanding this breita, Rav Asi bar Natan. He's going to go to Rav Sheshet, and Rav Sheshet is going to resolve his problem. And that's where we're going to get to our answer. So it's going to be a little bit of a story. Dichtiv. Vayidaber Moshe et moadei Hashem al bnei Yisrael. You might say, what does this have to do with anything? So we'll see in a minute. This is the intro pasuk to this is a bit of a debate which pasuk we're quoting here, but in Parshat Emor, it says both at the beginning of the section and at the end of the section, this pasuk about the holidays. Okay, it's a general pasuk about the holidays. These are the holidays for Bnei Israel. V'hatanya, and it says there's a breita on that. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Yomel, Moadei ne'emru v'lo ne'emra Shabbat b'reshit imahem. When we talk about holidays, we mean holidays and we don't mean Shabbat. Okay, we're differentiating between these are the holidays that Moshe told the Jews about, not Shabbat. Ben Azai says, Moadei ne'emru v'lo ne'emar parshat Nedarim. This verse is telling you, and what they're saying is the verse specified Moadim to tell you, first we said Moadim and not Shabbat. That's Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Ben Azai seems to be adding, not like he disagrees with the first, but he says it's also telling us we're talking about holidays. We're not talking about Nedarim. Okay, now the first one maybe was reasonable. Holidays versus Shabbat, we could see you connecting them. Holidays versus Nedarim, we're saying holidays and not vows. What does that have to do with the other? So Ravasi bar Natan kashale hamatnita, he really didn't understand this breita, as we're kind of confused as well. He goes to Nehardea, find Rav Sheshet to ask him, doesn't find him. He follows him to Mechoza. He says, finds Rav Sheshet. He says, Rav Sheshet, I don't understand. It says there, Moadei Hashem and not Shabbat Bereshit. But here's my question. Vaha k'tiv Shabbat imahem. And it wasn't really that he didn't understand this, but he said, what do you mean? If you go to the beginning of Parshat Emor, you might remember this. The beginning of Parshat Emor, or not the beginning of the Parshat, but the beginning of the section of the Moadim, Parakaf Gimel, starts off with, it says this general pasuk, and then it goes to talk about Shabbat. So what do you mean it's not connected here? Of course it's connected. The Torah puts it in there. And Vitu Moadei Hashem ne'emru v'lo ne'emra parshat Nedarim imahem v'hai misitra k'tiva. At the end of the Moadim, it also talks about Nedarim. What are we talking about there? Nedarim are in Bamidbar Lamed. But if you remember, in Bamidbar Kafchet and Kaftet, those are the chapters where we read about we always read it on Maftir of all the holidays, all the sacrifices they bring on the holidays. And then after that is Nedarim. So Nedarim is mentioned right next to, okay, maybe it's not as clear as the Shabbat where it was within the section, but it was also mentioned at the end of the holidays. So that was his problem. Not really that he didn't understand, but again, this leads to, I don't really understand what they're saying, right? What does this mean? Both of them seem to be connected. So Amarlei Hachi Katani says, this is what they mean to say. And now we're on Amud Bet. Moadei Hashem tzrichim kiddush beitin. Shabbat Bereshit ein tzricha kiddush beitin. The holidays require, we always talk about the difference between Shabbat and the holidays. What is that? Shabbat is determined by God, right? So Shabbat falls on the same day no matter what we do. It's always Shabbat, right? The seventh day of the week. That started from God creating the world. But the Jews determine when the holidays fall out because they decide when Rosh Chodesh is going to be, and therefore that determines when the holidays are going to be. And that's why at the end of all our prayers, we say Mikadesh HaShabbat, and on holidays we say Mikadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim, because the Jews themselves, we add the word Yisrael because they themselves determine the time. So that's what it means that Shabbat is not a moed. It means that we don't have the power to control when Shabbat is, but we do sanctify the holidays. What about the Nedarim, the vows? Finally, we're getting to our point. I told you it would take a little while. Moadei Hashem tzrichim. Now, what was our question? Where does Beit Shamai get 3 hadrotot by Nedarim? We're going to get it from here. When it comes to determining the holidays and you want to determine the new moon, you need dayanim who are real dayanim, who are learned, knowledgeable. They have to know the halacha to understand, is this really the time for the new moon or not? If you remember from Masechet Rosh Hashanah, we had a whole thing about how they determine the new moon. But when it comes to undoing vows, you don't need those kind of judges. Okay, that's what it was saying. That Moed comes to exclude Nedarim, that the criteria for the courts to determine the new moon, which determines the holidays, is not the same courts that you need for vows. And that's where Beit Shamai gets it from. So now we resolve the third question against Beit Shamai, and now we can move on. But before we move on, we have one last question, which is, just like we asked before, well, if you learn Gimel Hedyotot, then why does it say Rashi Hamatot? V'ha b'parashat Nedarim Rashi Hamatot k'tiv. It says, Moshe told this to the heads of the tribes, which would seem like this is your jurisdiction. Amar Rav Chisda, the same, they quote the exact same as before, V'item or Rabbi Yochanan, either Rav Chisda said it or Rabbi Yochanan said it, B'yachim Mumche, that there's two tracks. One is option Shalosh Hedyotot. Option number two is you can go the Yachim Mumche track, and that you learn from Rashi Hamatot. Last part for today, and this is going to be a little bit surprising. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Hashotek al manat lemekat, mefer afilu mikam ba'aras sarayim. Our Mishnah said, B'yom Shamo, the day you hear the vow, you have to be made fair. You miss that window, you're done. Comes Rabbi Chanina and says, well, if you have a reason for pushing it off, such as you want to teach your wife a lesson. Why do you want to teach your wife a lesson? Because, okay, now I'll give you an example. If your children make a mistake, and you pick up the pieces right away and resolve it for them right away, right? Anyone will tell you that's not the right way to go about it, because then they'll never learn next time. They'll know that you pick up the pieces and they can do whatever they want next time, and they know their parents will come pick up the pieces. So that's the same thing here with the husband and the wife. You have to remember a little bit of, again, I don't think the relationship was like this for everything, but for certain things, the relationship was like this, where the husband was really taking care of the wife. Okay, right. Obviously, she took care of all sorts of other things, like the cooking and the laundry and the this and the that. But he had to protect her from making mistakes that women were prone to make, such as making vows. And therefore, his job is to be made for the vow. Now, but his job is also to prevent her from taking a vow in the first place, because what if he doesn't hear her vow, right? Or let's say she makes a vow and he doesn't hear it for a while. So remember, if she goes against that vow all that time before he hears it, when he, in the end, is made fair, again, if we go like the Ran said, it's only from then on in, and she could have made all these mistakes and have to get punished for it. So he wants to protect her. So he doesn't want her to vow again. So what he does is he puts as we say, right, puts the fear of God in her. He says, listen, he just ignores it right now. And he doesn't make her right away. And then she starts getting nervous. Oh, I took a vow and now I'm stuck with it. And she starts to realize the implications of her actions. Well, he has up to 10 days. And after 10 days, if he pushes it off for that reason, in order to teach her lesson, that she gets a little bit worked up about it and worried, then he only comes in later, then she'll learn her lesson. So if he does that, he has up to 10 days. So all of a sudden we change this B'yom Shamo to, well, you have this 10-day window. Now you can imagine people were a little bit upset with what he said. It doesn't sound right. So we're going to start bringing questions against him. Today we're going to have one question and resolve it. And then after that, you'll see there's more. Mativ Rava. Rava says, how could that be? Look at the Tosefta, and this is a Tosefta we've seen a number of times. When do we say that if the husband died, remember the whole thing, the husband and the father have to do it together when she's betrothed. And then if the husband dies, then the father gets all the rights. Now here are all our options. Lo shama habal, he didn't hear. Osha shama v'shatak, or he was heard and was silent. Osha shama v'hefel umeit bo bayom, or he heard and he nullified and then died within the same day, then the father can come and get all the rights. Aval, here comes the key part. Shama v'kiyem, he heard and he established it, ratified it. O sheshama v'shatak, or he was silent after he heard. Umeit b'yom shalacharav, and he died the next day, right? Then we assume that was kiyum neder and ein yachol la'afel. Now, according to Rabbi Chanina said, it could be he heard, didn't say anything because he was waiting the 10 days. And then that wasn't that he ratified it. So my lab b'shotek amanat lemekat, is it not that he was silent here in order to, get his wife to learn her lesson? And what do you see here? That's considered, it was ratified, meaning you can't be made fair after that. Now, they're not assuming when they say my lab, is it not in the case? What they mean is even in the case, because it didn't specify. It said any kind of hearing and not ratifying, right, and not nullifying is basically considered ratification if it's the next day already. So that seems to imply any situation where he was silent. So already by the next day, it's if he died the day after, it was clear he ratified it, because there is no such thing as hearing, not saying anything and ratifying and nullifying it later. So to which the Gemara says, "Lo, b'shotekam not l'kayem." No, what it means in this Tosefta is not a simple reading, any kind of silence. It was silence with the intent to ratify. If he was silent because he wanted to ratify it and not because he wanted to get rid of it within the next 10 days, then it would be considered ratified. To which the Gemara says, "Ihachi hainu osha shama v'kiyem." But then that's the exact, there's two cases here on the second part. He heard and he ratified, or he just heard and was silent. Now, hearing and was silent in order to ratify, that's the same as hearing and ratifying. They're basically, there's a minor difference, but they're not really any different. And it's the same thing. And you wouldn't need to say that twice. To which they answer, fine. So you don't like that? There's three options. Bishotek stam. Okay, we're going to have someone who is silent with the intent to ratify. That's already included in shama v'kiyem. He heard and ratified because it's basically the same idea. There's shama on the other extreme. Shama almanat, what was the word? Lemekat. Okay, he did it in order to teach his wife a lesson. And that's why he was silent. That's not mentioned in this Tosefta at all. Okay, what is mentioned in the Tosefta? The middle case, shama stam. He was just silent without any intent whatsoever. He didn't have intent to ratify it, but he also didn't have intent to nullify it. And it was already the next day, then he misses his opportunity. So that, and then lo nitokna la'av, the father won't have the option because it was already considered ratified. So this was a very pointed question. This source seemed to indicate any kind of silence is viewed as ratification. And Rabbi Chanina doesn't think that because he thinks there is a kind of silence that's not. To which the Gemara answers that they just weren't relating to that type of silence. There's two other kind of silences that it was relating to, but not that one. Okay, and with that, we're going to finish for today. We'll start with Rav Chisda's question, which starts at the very last line here. We'll start with that tomorrow. Okay, so again, at the end here, we started with this unique statement of Rabbi Chanina that there's this 10-day window if you want to teach her a lesson, if that's your intent. And then we started with questions against it. Wishing everyone a great day. We'll meet up tomorrow.